We're still here talking about the issue of Istiwa. Before we finish this chapter on Istiwa and move to the next chapter, we want to talk about the Wahhabi method. We want to talk about the Wahhabi method of taking verses literally in their claim, which they're inconsistent about. And so they would say that Allah is over the throne. But why don't they say that Allah is close if they take verses literally? And they don't make ta'wil. So the Wahhabis don't stop there with saying Allah rose over the throne and that he was under the throne and then he went over it. He ascended up towards the sky that was over him and then he overcame the throne by rising over it and being above it. But they don't say overcame though. They believe that Allah reiterates being very high above the throne, very far, far away, because he repeatedly attributed istiwa to himself. Like his saying, ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ, then he istawa over the arsh. We already clarified that the preponderant explanation for istiwa is domination, subjugation, conquering, having power over. يعني القهر والاستيلاء. That's the preponderant explanation for istiwa. And also it could be explained as hifz, preservation. Either way, it means Allah has power over the arsh, which is the largest creation. The ceiling of paradise. Most would probably not be brave enough to so frankly say that he is far, far away. And say those words, far, far away. But the religious evidence says, if he's over the arsh as they claim, the religious evidence says that the distance between the earth and the first heaven above is 500 years. The sky that we can see above us, the blue that we can see over us, that's the underside of the sky. And that sky is a solid object. It's not a bubble around the earth. That blue is not a bubble around the earth. That's the sky overhead. That sky is 500 years away. There are 7 heavens, and between one and the other are 500 years. Here's this earth we're on. Over this earth, 500 years above it, is a solid object called the sky. 500 years above that is another sky. And 500 years above that is another sky. And there are 7 of them. That makes 3,500 years away. Furthermore, the thickness of each heaven, like the distance between them, is also 500 years. That's an additional 3,500 years, totaling 7,000 years. 7,000 years. So from this earth up to the sky above us, that's 500 years. That sky itself, its thickness is 500 years. And above that sky is another sky 500 years away. And then that second sky itself is 500 years thick, and so on. There are 7 of those skies. Then above the 7th sky or 7th heaven is paradise, which is not only disconnected from the 7th sky, but even larger than it. Then above paradise is that arsh that is larger than heavens and earth combined. According to them, that far, far arsh is where the creations stop. And Allah is disconnected and so high above that he is not even close to it. That's how they would talk. They say he's not even close to the arsh. That's how high he is. And look how high is the arsh. And they don't realize that they compare Allah to the creations by this. Therefore, he is what they see as unimaginably far. So far that they are tickled by how it baffles them. They also often specifically say that Allah has disconnected from his creation, extremely high above them. It is known that some of Wahhabis say that he is so high that he exists without a place. They say he's so high he's not even in a place. He's so far up there that he's not even anywhere. However, how could he be so far away when abandoning ta'wil dictates that he is close? If we are to abandon ta'wil and take the texts as they are, then we have a group of texts that would dictate that Allah is close, not far. When the companions were raising their voices while mentioning Allah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, as narrated by Al-Bukhari and others, "Irba'u ala anfusikum." Take it easy on yourselves. فَإِنَّكُمْ مَا تَدْعُونَ أَصَمَّ وَلَا غَائِبًا. You are not calling upon one who is deaf nor absent. إِنَّمَا تَدْعُونَ سَمِيعًا قَرِيبًا. You are calling upon one who hears, and he is qareeb. So the apparent meaning of qareeb is close. Sami'an qariba. So they're not going to explain that by the apparent meaning. Then they're going to make ta'wil, and then they're going to be contradicting themselves. إِنَّ الَّذِي تَدْعُونَ أَقْرَبُ إِلَىٰ أَحَدِكُم مِّنْ عُنُقِ رَاحِلَتِهِ. And whom you call upon is aqrab. Literally, it means closer to one of you than the neck of his animal upon which he rides. So how would a Wahhabi explain that? He's going to say, closeness means knowledge. Then what's that? That's ta'wil. Then maybe you'll get a Wahhabi and say, that's just one ayah anyway. Or that's one hadith. That's just one hadith anyway. We brought many ayahs about Istawa. But forget not also the 16th verse of Surah Qaf. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. We are aqrab to the human than the jugular vein. Literally, like we just said, aqrab means closer. And how can they claim that Allah is so and how can they claim that Allah is so unimaginably high above the throne when he said in the 19th verse of Al-Alaq, وَاسْجُدْ وَقْتَرِبْ, prostrate and iqtarib, draw near, literally. This will be like a smack to the face that will lead them to make another ta'wil, this one in particular. Prostrate, that means go down, not up. وَقْتَرِبْ, and come closer. Go down and come closer. Because this particular verse not only gives the impression that he is close in a literal sense, but that he is below, because prostration requires going down to the ground. In their conviction, one's head is closer to Allah when standing than when prostrating, because when standing, his head is closer to the sky than when prostrating. If prostrating brings one closer to Allah, and if they do not believe in ta'wil, then they would have to say that there is something close to Allah. Now he gave so many texts. And they would have to say that Allah is below, so that the prostrating person can draw near to him. So what they're going to do, they're going to make ta'wil. Why should they then reinterpret the hadith of Imam Muslim that would literally be أَقْرَبُ مَا يَكُونُ الْعَبْدُ مِنْ رَبِّهِ وَهُوَ سَاجِدٌ? The closest the slave would be to his Lord is while he is prostrating. So stand back, cross your arms, and watch the Wahhabi eat his own words about denying ta'wil in all these texts. Every single one of them he's going to give a ta'wil to. To escape this obvious contradiction, they make ta'wil like they did for the slave girl hadith when they got confused about Allah being in the sky or over the heavens. Yani, that they made ta'wil for the slave girl hadith when they got confused about Allah being in the sky or over the heavens. Meaning, their belief was that because of Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh Istawa, they believed that Allah was over the throne, but the throne is over the sky. And then they were so confident about the hadith of the slave girl that they submit that as a primary evidence. And it doesn't even say what they say, because it's saying in the sky, not over the sky, not over the throne. So then they're going to just lie and say, oh, it means over the throne. So how do they make ta'wil for all these references that literally refer to closeness? Their ta'wil is to say their closeness to him is by obedience, and his closeness to them is his knowledge of them. Say, although that is correct, so that is correct, meaning if closeness can be by obedience or knowledge, then highness can be by majesty. Are you going to forbid someone from doing what you do? And be aware that many Wahhabis have made ta'wil for the hadith that we repeated frequently. فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing below you. That's the hadith with its right meaning. There's nothing below you, O Allah. So how would he be over the creations if there's nothing below him? That stands in direct contradiction to their convictions, isn't it? If they said he's over all the creations, that would mean that everything is below him, everything. But the Prophet ﷺ said nothing is below Allah. Nothing. Not everything, nothing. That's the exact opposite of their creed, and that's an authentic hadith narrated by Muslim and others. Even Al-Albani said this hadith is authentic, and Al-Albani's a fraud. They explain it as there's nothing close to you. Because that's they need something, some way to get out of this hadith. And they can't deny the hadith. They can't deny the hadith, so they needed some way to try to explain it, to make a ta'wil for it. And sometimes they say it means there's nothing beside you. If they say it means nothing is close to him, confront them with all these texts that when ta'wil is abandoned mean that he is close. Like, let's say a Wahhabi was saying Allah is over the Arsh, and then you gave him this hadith. Or let's say a Wahhabi said Allah is over the creation, or he's over everything, he's above everything. So you gave him this hadith, فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ. Oh Allah, there's nothing below you. So they're going to say, if they say this means nothing is close to him, then confront them with all these texts that when ta'wil is abandoned, they mean he is close. And you say, wait, but what about this one? You're calling someone who's Sami' and Qareeb. They say, it means close. They say, close. That means knowledge, by his knowledge. Say, but it even says in the hadith, Aqrab min rahilati. It's closer than the neck of your animal. They say, la, it means ilm. So, but the ayah says, Aqrabu min hablil warid, closer than the jugular vein. They say, la, it means ilm, knowledge. What about the hadith? أقرب ما يكون العبد من ربه وهو ساجد. The closest the slave would be to his Lord's when he's making sujood. Wasjud waqtarib, etc. Bring all those texts when he says this means nothing is close to him. So what's he going to do? He's going to make ta'wil for every single one of those. You say to him, so how come you get to make ta'wil but nobody else does? And if they say that it means nothing is beside him or next to him, then what do they say of Ibn Taymiyyah? When he said in Bayanu Talbis al-Jahmiyyah, and he says similar in Majmu' al-Fatawa, verbatim quote, Al-Arshu lam yamtali bih wa annahu yuq'idu nabiyahu alayhi salamu ma'ahu ala al-arsh. The throne does not get filled up by Allah. He doesn't take up the whole thing. That's what Ibn Taymiyyah said. He said the throne does not take up the whole, Allah does not take up the whole arsh. And he sits his prophet with him on the throne. So either way, if they say it means nothing's close to him, bring them all those. So how do you answer that? They're going to make ta'wil. Then you crush them there. If they say it means nothing is beside him or next to him, then you tell them, but Ibn Taymiyyah said, Allah doesn't fill up the arsh, and then he will sit Muhammad next to him. Yani, there's going to be a space left on the arsh, and then Allah seats the Prophet next to him, alayhi salatu wassalam. So they're not going to have any answer. They might deny it even. Say, no, he never said that. Shaykh never said that. Because those are people who do talk without knowledge. If they don't know something, they will deny it, although they don't know that it's true or false. Or they'll say, I don't know it. If he says, I don't know it, tell him, doesn't matter. It's still true. It's because you don't know it doesn't mean it's not true. And if you talk to someone who argues, who uses his ignorance as evidence, then you know that you're talking to a person that's not very knowledgeable and not very clever. So think twice before you go very far with this one. Maybe you can help this one. What ugly blasphemy! And oh, what a vicious exposure. This is the man they call the Shaykh of Islam, Shaykh al-Islam. And this is their creed, although they claim that they do not believe that Allah has a body. So according to him, there's not only something close to Allah, but also beside him. Both of those would be the case. Close and next to. Because they're trying to avoid the hadith, فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing below you, O Allah. And maybe a Wahhabi would say, but that's only one hadith. You tell how many you want before you're going to believe in the Prophet then? You need 5 hadiths before you believe in what the Prophet says, or what? Alayhi salatu wassalam. And by this, they claim the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Yani by this way of explaining the hadith, فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ, to say it means nothing is close to you, O Allah, or nothing is next to you, instead of nothing is below you. Then they claim that the Prophet was not eloquent, in a way similar to what we mentioned about the verse of Istawa, if you remember from last week's lesson. According to them, instead of saying what would literally be, so this is a bare translation of the hadith only, O Allah, you are the first and there is nothing before you. You are the last and there is nothing after you. You are the obvious and there is nothing above you. And you are the hidden and there is nothing below you. So that play on opposites throughout the entire hadith, that's consistent and that's eloquent. But according to them, he broke the pattern and was actually saying, there's nothing near you, or there's nothing next to you. It clearly means, and there's nothing below you, there's nothing under you. Thus refuting their obvious misunderstanding then, there's nothing below him. And there's nothing above him also from the same hadith. وَأَنْتَ الظَّاهِرُ فَلَيْسَ فَوْقَكَ شَيْءٍ. You are a zahir and there's nothing over you. وَأَنْتَ الْبَاطِنُ فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ. And you are al-batin and there's nothing beneath you. This refutes their obvious misunderstanding of ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. They claim it means then he ascended to the heaven, like we already said. So then according to them it means he was below the heaven and then he came over it. He overcame it. And if they say it means nothing is below him, then they have agreed with us. If nothing is above him and nothing is below him, then he is not in a place. And furthermore, the Wahhabis bind Allah to time because they did not know that the most particular attribute of God is that he has no beginning. Yani, that's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about God, that the beginningless one, the uncreated one, and that the most particular attribute of the creation is that it has a beginning, because that's the meaning of being created, that you didn't exist and then you came into existence. So since they didn't know that, which means they're not monotheists, the Wahhabiyya have attributed time to Allah. They argue that Allah starts and stops and begins and ends by this verse. إِنَّ رَبَّكُمُ اللَّهُ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ فِي سِتَّةِ أَيَّامٍ ثم استوى على العرش. They say it means, surely your Lord created heavens and earth in 6 days. Thumma, then, at some point in time, that's what it means to them, he rose above the throne. They explain thumma expresses sequence and delay. We answer, thumma can also mean and, meaning that it might come without being for sequence or delay. It could just be for connecting things. We can put, inshallah, if Allah will, I'll put some references here of some scholars documenting that thumma can mean and, merely and, doesn't have to mean then afterwards in some time. It may also be said, if this verse gives the meaning of sequence, if there is sequence in this, thumma stawa ala al-arsh, then, so if thumma is giving sequence in this ayah, the only thing being put in order here is the mere information, meaning that Allah informs about the creation of heavens and earth, then he informs about his istiwa over the arsh. That does not mean that Allah changed, and that does not mean that he is bound by time. Both of those answers can be demonstrated by this verse of the Quran, among others, but this one's very clear. خلقكم من نفس واحدة ثم جعل منها زوجها. He created you humans from one soul, Adam. Then he created from that soul its spouse, Eve. So if thumma is taken literally here, it would mean that the humans were created before their mother Eve, that the progeny came before their mother, because it says he created you from one soul, then, so if it means after that, it would mean then after he created you from one soul, he created from that soul its spouse. This is impossible. Doesn't make any sense. That's like the Christians saying that Jesus is God and he's the Son of God at the same time. The Father didn't even come before the Son, according to them. Likewise, Allah did not physically rise above the Arsh at a time after the creation of the skies and earth. That is impossible, because he's not created. Had they had a proper creed about the eternal creator, they would not have said such a thing. The true meaning is, surely your Lord created the skies and the earth in 6 days, and thumma, and he istawa ala al-arsh, according to the aforementioned possibilities previously mentioned. Here, we didn't translate it, istawa ala al-arsh, because it's enough for us to say Allah knows what it means. We don't have to insist that istiwa means dominance and subjugation. We don't have to insist there. Rather, that's the preponderant tafsir. That's the likely tafsir of the ayah. But if you don't want to commit to that, you can just say Allah knows what it means and don't translate it. According to the aforementioned possibilities previously mentioned for istiwa, qahr, dominance, or hifz, preservation. Now, also, before we finish this section on istiwa, we need to cover Malik's statement about kayfiyah, Highness or modality. To close this section, know that these people use an unconfirmed narration from Imam Malik. And subhanAllah, I never met a Wahhabi who tried to argue that this is a confirmed narration. Rather, they'll bring you their unconfirmed narration of what Malik said. And if you told them, this is my experience, if you told them it's not even a confirmed report, khalas, they have nothing to say. That he said, according to them, according to what they use, Istawa is known, but the how of it is not known. Istawa is known, but how is not known. That's what they say Malik said. This is easy. This narration is discredited by two narrations from Al-Bayhaqi in Al-Asma' wa Sifat. One of those narrations is from the route of Abdullah ibn Wahhab, كنا عند مالك ibn أنس فدخل رجل. We were with Malik ibn Anas when a man entered. فقال, and he said, Ya Aba Abdillah, oh Abu Abdillah, meaning that's Malik. Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. So he recited the ayah of istiwa. And then he said, كيف استواؤه? How is his istiwa? كيف استواؤه? قال فأطرق مالك. Abdullah ibn Wahhab said, then Malik lowered his head, وأخذته الرحضاء, and he was overtaken by sweat, and he became furious. ثم رفع رأسه, then he raised his head, فقال, and he said, الرحمن على العرش استوى. So he recited the ayah. كما وصف نفسه, just as he attributed to himself. الرحمن على العرش استوى, like he said about himself. ولا يقال كيف, it is not said how. He didn't say we don't know how. He said it's not said. لا يقال, it's not said. That's not the same thing. Don't be confused there. For a Wahhabi, that means the same thing because he's retarded. For Wahhabi, it is not said how means we don't know how. But really, it is not said how means that's not applicable. وَكَيْفٌ عَنْهُ مَرْفُوعٌ, and how is inapplicable to him. Marfu' means elevated, raised, lifted. Anhu, from him. Kayf is lifted from him. That means it's inapplicable to him. That's confirmed from Malik. Not that he said, we don't know how. And then he said, وَأَنْتَ رَجُلُ سُوءٍ, you are a bad man. صَاحِبُ بِدْعَةٍ, a perpetrator of heresy. أخرجوه, get him out of here. قال فأخرج الرجل, Abdullah said, then the man was put out. And the other version is from Yahya ibn Yahya, that he said, كنا عند مالك ibn Anas, we were with Malik ibn Anas. فجاء رجل, when a man came, فقال, and he said, Ya Aba Abdillah, oh Abu Abdillah, that's Malik. Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. So he recited the ayah of istiwa, and then he said, وَكَيْفَ اسْتَوَى, how did he istawa? He said, فَكَيْفَ اسْتَوَى, how did he istawa? قال فأطرق مالك برأسه حتى علاه الرحضاء. Malik lowered his head until the sweat overtook him. ثم قال, and then he said, الاستواء غير مجهول. Istiwa is not unknown. It's not unknown. That means we know that that's confirmed attribute for Allah. It came in the Quran. وَالْكَيْفُ غَيْرُ مَعْقُولٍ, and how is not rational. It is irrational. And we could just say, instead of not rational, we could say not rational or irrational. How is irrational? غَيْرُ مَعْقُولٍ. That means it doesn't make sense. Doesn't mean we don't know how it is. Saying, وَالْكَيْفُ غَيْرُ مَعْقُولٍ, also to a Wahhabi, that means we don't know how it is. غَيْرُ مَعْقُولٍ doesn't mean we don't know how it is. It means it doesn't make sense. وَالْإِيمَانُ بِهِ وَاجِبٌ, believing in it is obligatory. وَالسُّؤَالُ عَنْهُ بِدْعَةٌ, questioning it is an innovation. وَمَا أَرَاكَ إِلَّا مُبْتَدِعًا, and I only see you as an innovator. فَأَمَرَ بِهِ أَنْ يُخْرَجْ, then he ordered for the man to be put out. So his saying that istawa is not unknown means that it is known because it was mentioned in the revelation. And his saying that how is not rational means that saying how about Allah does not make sense. So remember the great difference between we do not know how and there is no how. But be on alert. Some people use this very expression when they say how, but they use it to mean the reality. They're saying we don't know the reality. Someone might say, thus one would say, I do not know how Allah is, meaning I do not know his reality, which is true, but should not be said like that, because how doesn't apply to Allah. How is only for creation. Because the answer to how is something specific. And you cannot specify Allah. Allah has no specifications because he's not created. You say how, the answer is close, far, big, small, etc., moving, still, yellow, green, etc. According to this, if someone was saying, I don't know how Allah is, and he means, I don't know his reality, then he doesn't blaspheme. It won't be kufr. But we're going to teach him, don't say how, though. Say, I don't know Allah's reality. And say, Allah does not have a how. As for those body-worshipping Wahhabis, they say that they do not know how his two hands are, and how he puts his foot in hell, and how he goes up and down in the sky. And this is certainly blasphemy. So they mean something else. They're not saying we don't know the reality. They're basically saying, without realizing it, we don't know the created description. Wallahu a'lam. We'll stop there. Do you have any question for me?